It was a journey that began in 2016. It is really hard to believe that this has only been going on for approximately 2 years. 8 seasons, 2 years, the greatest show on television, not ever. Of course, that honor goes to Babylon 5, even though there's some connection with this, or with that I might explain in a minute. But the greatest show presently on television has finally come to an end. Of course, it's been succeeded by what I am now calling the greatest show on television, that being Castlevania. But what we're really talking about here is Voltron Legendary Defender Season 8. And we are going to talk about Season 8. It is the final season, 13 episodes strong, and wow, was it strong, to put it mildly. And also, as has been going on throughout 2018, just about every time I've done a season season wrap-up for Voltron Legendary Defender, there has been part of the animated Godzilla trilogy with the partnership between Toho and Netflix, and it's hard to believe that that's only been going throughout 2018. Like, all 3 movies of that, granted the last Godzilla movie, that being The Planet Eater, which is Godzilla. They're kind of calling it Godzilla 3 on Netflix. But anyway, that aired finally just a couple days ago, January 9th, 2019, a couple days from the day that this is going to end up getting released. And wow, we'll talk about Voltron Legendary Defender Season 8. We'll also kind of give an overall show wrap-up, because now that the series is over, and as far as I know, there are no plans to do any kind of sequel or prequel, even though I think a prequel would be totally worthwhile to do and would probably be well regarded and welcomed, frankly. But also with the Godzilla trilogy, the animated trilogy that we had on Netflix this year, we will cover that. We'll cover Godzilla, the Planet Eater, which is the last movie in that trilogy. And we will also talk about Voltron Volume 3 from Lion Forge Comics, which is Voltron Legendary Defender Volume 3, which is probably going to be the last series from that. I don't know if there's going to be a point to doing more Legendary Defender comics. I would welcome them, because the comic books have largely felt just like you're watching the TV show, just you're reading it in comic book form, even though they are original stories. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Volume 3 of that as well. And that will pretty much wrap up this show. And it'll be, I guess, the last one that we do, because there's not going to be any more, as far as we know, there aren't going to be any more seasons of Voltron Legendary Defender. And also, that Godzilla trilogy is over. So the next show that we'll probably review, outside of, say, the Star Wars update or the Star Trek update, will be when we get Castlevania Season 3, which, as far as I know, is actually happening. So this is kind of bittersweet, even though, again, Voltron Legendary Defender, 8 seasons. Now, granted, some of those seasons were only like 5 or 6 episodes long, but 8 seasons inside of 2 years, that's honestly kind of weird. But then really, what makes a season anymore? What even makes a TV show anymore? I think really the lines of animated and live action have long been blurred, finally, in the United States. It's been that way in Japan forever, but finally in the United States, I think that's true. And honestly, shows like a lot of Netflix animated series, for example, BoJack Horseman, or, including Voltron Legendary Defender, Castlevania, or even animated series, some long running like The Simpsons, to some not so long running like Rick and Morty. The idea that an animated series is something for kids has long gone. I think that ship has finally sailed in America, and I think Legendary Defender had no small part in that, frankly, because this was a show that literally, as I've said over the years as we've reviewed each season, and I have reviewed each season as it's come out, this is a show that anybody can watch. I've said that every time. Every demographic gets appealed to in this, and that's a miracle, because, Star Wars tries to do that, but it doesn't always, achieve that goal or achieve that end, as to where I think Voltron did it with flying colors, no pun intended there, to the colors of the lions. But wow, Season 8, we got to talk about it. And it's a season, honestly, that starts off a little slow. I think it was, it took maybe 4 episodes for it to really pick up, and, you're getting a lot more of what's happening on Earth and a lot more of the, well, I didn't mind getting a lot more of the Atlas, which is the ship that, that Earth, the Earth Force, it's not Earth Force, but that the garrison, developed, that was a mixture of human technology and Altean technology. And, it was really cool to see so much of that in this season, and including a lot more with the what are effectively Veritech fighters. I mean, it's so Robotech, it's almost hitting you over the head with how much they were influenced by Robotech to create this. But it was so cool. And the season really continued on with that. And really that whole theme of, which has been Voltron Legendary Defender's real strength, is that cool factor that it has in spades. Let me, I want to say this quick before I forget. When the soundtracks finally officially come out for this whole series, I don't care if it's a 20-disc box set. These might be the greatest soundtracks of all time. Like, this might be the greatest soundtrack overall for the whole series of all time. It's so fucking intense and epic. And in fact, there's times where I was working out, especially during season 8, where I was working out while I was watching the show, just to kind of get it in. And like, there's times where shit so intense is happening, like I could feel it in my workout. I was able to get a couple extra reps, whatever. It's that good. Where the music alone has so much power and can tell so much of the story. Got to give a ton of credit to that. And really throughout the show overall, that's going to be my comment on the music. But season 8, it really shined. There's some very, very intense moments with the music in season 8. Now, season 8... I gotta admit, as cool as everything was, there's battle after battle, there's like new technology, or they're going through, spoiler alerts, folks, they're going through the universal mind where all consciousness is interconnected. You had so many wild ideas get laid out in this. The multiverse where, pretty much you find out what Hanerva, or who was originally, the witch Hagar, who was working for Zarkon. Of course, you find out what that was all about, really, and a lot of this is stemming off of season 7 as well, where you find out that's Lotor's mother, and she was the wife to Emperor Zarkon, but then she lost her memory, but then she got her memory back when she went into, kind of the pocket universe where there is so much quintessence and everything, and Lotor comes back and so much happens in this. Okay, there's a ton of shit. You find out, of course, Hanerva's real goal here is she just wants to have her family back. She wants to find in the multiverse, she wants to find the alternate universe, the perfect universe, where Lotor, her son, is treated with respect by Emperor Zarkon, or by Zarkon, and where she is married to Zarkon, and she can live happily ever after. And I'll tell you, like, it's pretty amazing. In a world, it seems, in a world of entertainment, and I'm speaking very broadly, not just about Netflix or Voltron Legendary Defender, in a world of entertainment where it seems like writers really suck ass at creating villains, Voltron Legendary Defender has not really had that problem, which is pretty impressive for a lot of reasons. But you start to feel bad. There's points in season 8 where you feel bad for Zarkon, because Zarkon comes back. There's points where you actually feel bad for Lotor, even though that's been going on over the past, few seasons, really. Ever since, I guess, pretty much season 4, when Lotor entered the scene, you do have some empathy for him. And you really end up having empathy for Hanerva, or Hagar, depending on at what point the character is in. It's the same person, of course. And I was amazed by that. Like, I genuinely felt bad for Hanerva, and like I understood sort of what she was trying to do. The problem is that for her to find her alternate universe, and she's trying to harness all the quintessence and, pretty much enslave all of the Alteans, which she's Altean, but enslave all the Alteans to use their power and their collective quintessence to rip into other universes, pretty much. And there's a really cool moment where actually Voltron rips into another universe, and it does so by literally slicing a hole with the blazing sword in the universe. That's actually like fairly accurate science, is that theoretically you could, if there are multiverses, if there are alternate universes, you could rip a hole into them if you heated a section of our universe enough. Superheat wouldn't even be the word to describe it, but that is actually fair science. And that's another thing that we get a lot of on display. Incredible accurate science, like the white hole comes back in this, which that's a genuine theory, and they play it up very well in Voltron Legendary Defender, as they have been for the past couple of seasons. So you get the white hole coming back, but then also a lot of the concepts around Altean alchemy, which once again there are some very I think there are some concepts within Voltron Legendary Defender that are very rare, but are a genuine part of alchemy as we would understand it coming out of the Enlightenment that doesn't get talked about much. So I found that to be very interesting within the show once again. But that's been a strength with the show for really ever since the beginning, and I've talked about it since the beginning. But anyway, maybe the most impressive feat of season 8 is that you end up feeling bad for all of the villains that have been developed over these 8 seasons. There are a lot of other really cool things that happen within this season. I'll tell you, like, now that you have, after 8 seasons, you have such a great cast of characters, like secondary characters and so on, that are so much fun, or even the primary characters. There were a couple breathers within the 13 episodes of season 8. And one of the breathers was there's a time where they celebrate this day, like this holiday on this planet that they want to help out and, of course, have them be part of the Voltron force. And while they're celebrating everything there, they're already part of the Voltron coalition, I should say, not the Voltron force, but the Voltron coalition. And while they're there, like, Shiro's kind of walking around, everybody's going around at this carnival and everything to celebrate this holiday, and they're having like an arm wrestling tournament, and Shiro ends up joining the arm wrestling tournament. Now, he has like a robotic arm, so he kind of kicks ass through a lot of it, but then there's other contestants who have robotic arms. But it was very much like watching, it was almost, they really played it up, and they did the cheesy music and, kind of the cheesy presentation and everything, where it was very reminiscent, and I'm sure this was intentional, of Sylvester Stallone's movie Over the Top, which I still think that movie is, it's ridiculous, but it's so much fun at the same time. As long as you understand its cheesiness, and Shiro ends up becoming the champion. Like, he takes it all the way. And it was just a fun little episode for them to do. There's another breather where they go through kind of, and I know other shows that do this. And in fact, I'm going to compare this to The Greatest Show of All Time because it did a similar thing. They did an episode where it's kind of a documentary style episode where, somebody has a camera and they're going around in a day of the life of, whatever's happening or wherever they happen to be. In this case, it was aboard the Atlas. And that was kind of a cool episode. It's sort of a trope now, but at the same time, I understand why if the producers or the writers want to end up doing this, if Mitch Iverson, one of the primary writers for the show, ends up wanting to do this, hey, who am I to stop him? But I'll tell you, that speaks of, and we're going to get into some of the bigger things that happened within this season, because there was some major shit that went down. But this all really reminded me of what is genuinely the greatest show of all time, the greatest television show of all time, which most people know what it is, know what I say it is, and that is Babylon 5. This really felt like season 4/season 5 of Babylon 5, where it felt like was season 8. So with season 4 of Babylon 5, J. Michael Straczynski, who made that show, which, by the way, J. Michael Straczynski, this is the connection with Babylon 5, also created and was the lead writer for Voltron the Third Dimension, which was a 90s continuation, shall we say, or kind of a reimagining of Voltron, long before Voltron Legendary Defender was a gleam in anyone's eye, long before Netflix was even a gleam in anyone's eye. But anyway, so, Voltron has attracted great writing in the past, because I think J. Michael Straczynski is certainly one of the greatest writers in history, certainly within Hollywood anyway. And with season 4 of Babylon 5, Straczynski didn't know if he was going to get a season 5. He had a 5-year plan, but he didn't know if he was going to get that season 5. So he rushed a bunch of storylines to come to completion in season 4. In fact, there was even, much like in season 8 of Voltron Legendary Defender, there was a documentary episode within that. And, where someone's going around with a camera and interviewing everybody, and so on. I would not be surprised if, because of the fact that, I imagine that Lauren Montgomery, one of the producers and main brains behind the show, and who's Joaquin DeSantos, and also, of course, Mitch Iverson and so on, I imagine they pulled from Voltron's history all of the different, there's been like 3 different Voltron shows that are actually Voltron, not like Beast King Go Lion or anything like that. And so they probably knew of Straczynski's work. They probably knew about Babylon 5 as well. In fact, I think most people in Hollywood know about Babylon 5. They just don't want anyone else to know about it, because then they're going to want to watch it and they're going to find out how shitty the shows they make are. But, Voltron Legendary Defender is actually a great show. So I could imagine they pulled some of that, like they said, oh, yeah, Straczynski did this. Let's copy that. And I feel like Lauren Montgomery and the rest of the crew with Voltron Legendary Defender didn't know how long they would have. And even the way the seasons have been split up and the episode numberings and everything have been kind of weird. I get the sense that maybe they thought they were going to get 10 seasons. And then they ended up only getting 8, and they had to wrap up a bunch of storylines in season 8 because some of it felt a little rushed. Like there's so much going on. When you're watching the season, you can't blink. I mean, you can't blink because, you don't know what the fuck's going to happen next. I mean, before you know it, the Atlas and Voltron have merged to become like this super Voltron, and that actually happens. I mean, it just happens out of nowhere, though, and you don't really get an explanation why. You do get an explanation as to what happens. It has to do with the Balmora, like merging it with whatever quintessence that they can kind of blast out. But that was such a cool moment. But I mean, if you blink, it happens, and you're going and you see it in action, and it's not in action for long because, again, a lot of things did feel rushed. So while at first it felt like a slower season, it's like in the second half of the season, which maybe originally was supposed to be a season 9 or so, things really pick up the pace. There's a point Lotor gets brought back, and inside of an episode or two, Lotor becomes merged with whatever Minerva's doing. I mean, like, you get no time to even deal with the fact that Lotor has come back. You get more time to handle Zarkon kind of coming back, and you get a return of the original Paladins and so on, which it was cool to see, King Arfor and whatever, return, and you get some interaction with the, with the OG Paladins, that flew Voltron originally 10,000 years ago and so on. But bottom line, a whole hell of a lot happens here. Now, the big thing that everybody's talking about, and spoiler alerts, folks, because in the last episode, pretty much it appears that Princess Allura dies. She joins forces with Minerva. Minerva has a crisis of conscience, blah, 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 and they end up, because with Minerva trying to find this reality, this alternate reality, this alternate universe where she can have a family and be happy. Which, I mean, who wouldn't want that, right? I mean, if a family's your thing, like it totally makes sense. Again, that's why you can have empathy for the character. In her doing so, in trying to find this alternate reality, when she finds it and stays there, it's going to destroy all other realities. And that's kind of the real danger, the real crux, the real threat that the Voltron Force is trying to very much handle. So, but when it does that, when basically that starts to happen, but to bring it all back, Princess Allura says, look, Lotor, showed me how to also create life, not just destroy it. And, with your and my power together, Allura and Minerva together, we can restore pretty much the multiverse. And that's exactly what ends up happening. Now, a lot of people have complained about Princess Allura dying. I feel like much of season 8, it felt rushed. Like, that's something, we should have had more time to deal with her death. Like, I would have loved, kind of like with Castlevania, where I applauded Castlevania in season 2 for having an entire episode that just dealt with the aftermath of the great battle, like between Alucard and, and so on, and Dracula. I would have loved to have had that episode, even though you do get a good 7-8 minutes of aftermath, where and you find out some pretty cool things like that Hunk, becomes like this culinary ambassador and brings worlds together through food, blah, blah, blah. Lance becomes a farmer. Of course, he falls in love. I mean, that's another storyline that was kind of rushed, is that you have Lance and Allura falling in love, more or less getting married, and then she just dies. And I would have loved to have explored that relationship more, and you could have had so many great stories where either Lance or Allura, one of them is in trouble and the other's in love and that's their lover and they need to go save them and so on. And that could have been so cool. But that didn't really happen either. But I mean, I do appreciate, I'm glad that she ended up with Lance and not with Keith. And of course she wasn't going to end up with Shiro, which, by the way, kind of almost the last clip or the last little, I don't know, scene, you could almost call it a scene, that you see with Voltron Legendary Defender is you see Shiro getting married to a guy, and they kiss, and they finally kiss. I thought that was great. There was actually a lot of moments throughout season 8. In fact, there's one of the Gulra who, she was one of the lieutenants for Lotor. You find out she has both dated men and women. I thought that was really cool. So once again, really the social forward thinking in this show was on full display within season 8. So I liked that. You find out that Pidge's family pretty much, becomes in charge of creating like the next generation of legendary defenders and so on. That's cool. Keith pretty much gets offered to become like the leader of, or the emperor of the Gulra Empire, which I think that was such a cool little twist. But again, you only get to spend a few minutes with that fact. And that very much smacked also of Babylon 5, where you have this, character who you wouldn't think would become emperor, but like, the character of Londo Mollari in Babylon 5, where he eventually does become emperor, or even like Veer, how Veer Kodo becomes, emperor of the Centauri Republic, in Babylon 5. It felt kind of like that, though it's cool because Keith says, no, I don't want to do it. And you find out that Keith's ultimate fate is that he, not ultimate as in his death, but he turns the Blade of Marmora into, which of course he had been a part of for a few seasons now, he turns that into like a humanitarian aid organization. And I thought that was really slick. I thought that was cool. They did a lot, and they show you who ends up, kind of the Gulra more or less join the Voltron coalition. And it basically ends with the Lions leaving. Like I guess they're not needed anymore, so they go off into space, and that's more or less how the show ends. It was a fine ending. I would have loved to have spent more time with it, and again, there seemed to be so many storylines that were so rushed. You easily could have gotten 2 more seasons just out of the story being told in season 8, but just expanding upon that, and I really wish we would have gotten that, but I'm not going to let it take anything away from the show. This is still one of the best shows ever made. If you wanted to differentiate animated series, this is certainly one of the top animated series in history, in my opinion. It is so funny, and the laughs were still like laugh out loud stuff for me in season 8. Like there's the really smart guy that like can figure out he figures out all the different permutations for what could happen in the future. And he's like, all right, you need to wear different socks. Otherwise the probability of us, making this mission work is going to be bad. And there's just like little jokes like that are just so goddamn funny. Season 8 didn't disappoint, but it just went too fast. And it's a shame because I think if the writers, if Mitch Iverson and Lauren Montgomery and all of them, if they knew just the kind of time frame that they would have, maybe they could have spaced this out a little bit better and paced it a little bit better because, I think back to like season 3 and season 4, parts of season 4. There's parts of season 4 that are incredibly exciting, but I think back to some of the earlier seasons and they spent way too much time on certain aspects of things. And but they did wrap it all, I'll give them credit. They wrapped it all in a very nice bow. Like there is no need for any future entries into the series. Like I said, I wouldn't mind seeing a prequel. I wouldn't mind seeing a sequel movie where Princess Allura comes back because you don't exactly see her die, right? It's and I'm pretty sure one of the producers have come out and said, oh yeah, she's dead, but there's wiggle room. Like you're not seeing her body vaporized effectively. At least I didn't feel that you really saw that. So I don't think that, and especially since Voltron is explicitly saying there's a multiverse, there's a universe where Princess Allura is probably still alive and she could come back. So I could see doing more in the future, but I don't know that that's going to happen. And it seems like everybody's more or less accepting the finality of season 8. So overall, again, what more can I say that I haven't talked about before when we reviewed every season of Voltron Legendary Defender? It is absolutely one of the best shows ever made. And it was and for the 2 years that it's been running from 2016 to 2018, it was consistently the best show, quote unquote, on television. It just was. And I think it would be fascinating to see people. I'd love to hear reviews from people that can like binge watch all 8 seasons at once. And like, because that's going to be a fucking wild ride. Even though we only ever had to wait a few months in between seasons, over the past couple of years, I mean, that's got to be a trip to fucking experience that. Holy shit, you know. And for a lot, I imagine there would be a lot of connections that would make more sense. And that leads us into reviewing Voltron, Legendary Defender Volume 3 of the comic book series, it's a 5-issue series, limited series, just like Volume 1 and Volume 2 were, and just like those, where it's a story that takes place between certain episodes. And it is, as far as I know, they are canon, because Mitch Iverson, who writes the comic books, is also one of the main writers for Voltron, for Voltron Legendary Defender. So he would know. And this story for Volume 3 takes place between Season 4 and Season 5. So we don't know, or the Voltron Force doesn't know that Lotor is the bad guy yet, but you can really tell what's happening here in the timing of this release. It's a perfectly fine story. They're rescuing a bunch of planets, more or less, from this giant space creature in the Galra. Like that's a gist that happens throughout Legendary Defender, certainly the cartoon. But what it serves is really reminding you that even at that time, 4 seasons ago, okay, that a lot of points brought up in Season 8 about the various characters, Lance, Keith even, and Allura and Shiro and so on, that it serves as a reminder that these characters have always been about this. Like, there's a lot of talk about Hunk being the food guy within it, which is a central factor in the last 10 minutes, we'll say, of the last episode of Season 8 of Legendary Defender. So the story is pretty run-of-the-mill, but it is like a refresher, and I think that's why they released those 5 issues throughout from September, I think, to December, or end of November, or maybe it was like August to end of November, they released all 5 issues. It really did serve as a reminder of a lot of plot points that would come up in Season 8 that maybe you forgot were set up for 4 seasons previous. And that's really that it's all about. It's great. I mean, it's a perfectly serviceable story, perfectly enjoyable. It's just like watching an episode, but you're reading it. And you get the humor. There's more laugh out loud moments in it, and there's tremendous action. Not as tremendous of action as happens in Season 8. I mean, the action's nuts that happened in Season 8 of Voltron Legendary Defender. I mean, it's at such a crazy clip too. But yeah, Volume 3, perfectly readable. Totally. If you love Legendary Defender, absolutely read all 3 volumes. Each one has been great. Each one has been like just watching an episode, like I said. But this one does serve to remind you that, again, a lot of things were put in place long before that end up coming to fruition or become important with various Voltron characters in Season 8. And I really, I loved it, and it was great to read it before then, because again, it did set you up for that. So great timing on the team's part, on Lion Forge's part, and certainly Mitch Iverson did a great job, again, putting a bow on everything, pretty much. So Voltron Legendary Defender, it is over. It's kind of an end of an era, because I still think everybody is in shock that it was that fucking good, but it was that fucking good. And it'll go down. I don't know if it's going to be like in my top 10 shows of all time, but it's going to be, it's easily in my top 25. I still think it was that great. I would have loved if it had a little more sexy. I would have loved if they could have been a little more explicit and not, appealed to the kids, to the little kids, a little less. But I get it. I understand why they had to do what they did, and I still think, Lauren Montgomery's brilliant. She's a genius. Mitch Iverson's a genius. Joaquin DeSantos. I mean, they're all obviously brilliant with what they put on the panel. And you see it, So just a tremendous show. Again, I wouldn't mind if they did more with it. If they want to go full franchise with it, I don't think that would hurt Netflix at all. But we'll see what the future holds. Now, something that I think really is finality, or has finality, and I can't imagine there's ever going to be any more done with it. And talk about being wrapped up in a nice package with a nice little bow on it. That is the animated Godzilla trilogy on Netflix, which the last entry in that, which is Godzilla 3, the Planet Eater, did finally just come out on January 9th, 2019 on Netflix. And why don't we go ahead and get into our review of that? Ooh, well, I gotta say, opening it up, I mean, I loved the first 2 movies in this series. I dare say the third one is still great, but it's easily the weakest of the bunch. The first two, of course, the first one being Planet of the Monsters, and then the second one was City on the Edge of Battle, and now the third one, which we're reviewing here, is The Planet Eater. And they do comprise one whole story. I mean, you really could watch this as one. I suppose total runtime would run about 5 hours, perhaps. But there's no real great span of time between each one. They really take place one after the other. I'm sure they were actually all made at the same time, and they just kind of drew out the release a bit, which is fine. And they all pick up pretty well from each other. You definitely need to see the previous films. They are in no way standalone whatsoever. But, if it's been a few months since you saw the last one, they give you a little reintroduction as to what's going on. And this really does have finality, and it is truly a conclusion. There is not going to be there will be no further stories, I don't think, within this. In fact, honestly, spoiler alerts, it's somewhat suggested that Godzilla's dead at the end of this. I mean, granted, in this trilogy, in this animated trilogy of Godzilla, you've had multiple Godzillas, so maybe there's other ones out there, but kind of the big bad that they were, that was highlighting, at least certainly in the last film, that took on Mechagodzilla City, that one could possibly be gone. It's not entirely clear at the end of it, but anyway, this is the continuing story of Haruo, who is kind of the hero from the previous two films. And the animation, the soundtrack, all that stuff is still just as rock solid as it was in the first two. The voice acting is largely great. And you get the return of, the usual suspects within this trilogy. You have, Memphis is back, and pretty much everyone else. Now, the third one, this does what was hinted at in previous films in the trilogy. This does end. I mean, let's just cut to it. This does end with Ghidorah versus Godzilla. Now, interestingly, in the English dub of this, and I didn't watch the Japanese dub, in the English dub, they do call him Ghidorah. They don't call him Ghidorah. I've heard it said both ways, and it depends on, I guess, really who's doing the translating, the dubbing, as far as how that goes. But they were saying Ghidorah. I'm so used to saying Ghidorah or King Ghidorah. They don't bother to call him king in this. It's interesting, though. While Ghidorah is a kind of a three-headed monster in this, Ghidorah is actually a creature from another universe that has varying abilities to fight Godzilla. It's a super complex story, and the third movie just makes it all the more complex. Okay. It's really interesting because, what got set up in the first movie is that you have all of the, you had three different races. You had the humans, you had the Bela Saludo, and then you had the Exif. Okay, and you had these three different races that, they'd all lost their homes to various monsters, and the two races, the Bela Saludo and the Exif, came to Earth and tried to help humans with Godzilla, but of course they end up all kind of getting defeated by this. And while the first movie is the humans trying to put an end to the monster, okay, that being Godzilla in that case, the second movie is definitely about the Bela Saludo, coming up with their solution. And in fact, in the third movie, you get a different perspective on their solution. You more or less find out that the Bela Saludo came up with Mechagodzilla and Mechagodzilla City with the nanometal, and that was actually designed to conquer the Earth, not really to defeat Godzilla. Like, it would have defeated Godzilla, then it would have been used to defeat the humans. If anything, it would have sucked in the humans like it was in City on the Edge of Battle, the second Godzilla movie in this trilogy. It would have sucked them in to where they would have powered the machine more and become one with the nanometal and become one with Mechagodzilla anyway, which is interesting. But it's interesting that the humans in the third movie come right out and say that was your weapon for Mechagodzilla was your weapon for invading the Earth. And so the Bela Saludo are just not trusted, and they're more or less out of the picture in this picture. So this one is all about what the EXIF, actually their solution against Godzilla and what they want to do. Well, their solution is what they consider their god, which is the monster that destroyed their planet, that being Ghidorah or Ghidra. I'll try and say Ghidorah since that's how they pronounce it in it. And there's a lot of, just like in the previous two films, there is some heavy duty philosophy and ideology in this. And I mean heavy, heavy shit. In fact, really what you find out is that the grand overall message, okay, you get your battle between, there's some stuff that happens between Haro and Memphis and so on, the humans and the EXIF, but you do get your somewhat of a battle. In fact, it's admittedly kind of anticlimactic. Like, it's not a big bad monster battle between Ghidorah and Godzilla, which I kind of wanted, but I get what they were going for, and it is kind of surprising that they didn't go with let's go with this classic battle. I mean, that is kind of the classic kaiju battle, which is Godzilla versus Ghidorah. There's also a nice save in this film, admittedly, by Mothra, and we'll talk about that in a second. But what this kind of the overall message of these movies turns out to be, when you finally get to the third one, is this is really a play on the Great Filter. Now, they don't say that by name, but that's really what they're getting at, is the EXIF believe that any time a civilization really starts to develop technology and so on, that eventually they get to the point where they create a monster greater than the race that created the technology, and then that is nature's way, or the universe's way of bringing balance back, is the creation of this monster. And it's funny because in a way, in fact, one of the humans says this, not even the EXIF, who are like a religious species, and again, they worship Ghidorah. A human claims very early on in the third film, saying, hey, maybe humans were created by the universe or God to bring, to birth monsters like Godzilla, like kind of like the old George Carlin skit, right? Where George Carlin says, maybe humans were the Earth's were created so the Earth could have plastic, right? And that humans weren't the point. Plastic was the point. And kind of a similar idea, but in this case, instead of plastic, we were designed to birth Godzilla. And that's an interesting concept to bring up. There is, again, some philosophy in the whole matter where I think it's actually Memphis who's saying that, monsters are called monsters because they are beyond human intellect to destroy. Like, so a monster is anything that's kind of beyond human. I'll admit I kind of like that quote out of context because, sometimes I like to think of myself as a monster. But anyway, yeah, so again, a lot of that philosophy, in there. And the other point that you get is that really you find out the EXIF and pretty much Memphis, who you think is Haruo's friend in the previous two films, you more or less find out Memphis is really, and that the EXIF in general, the few EXIF that are left, are really just priests that are vanguards to bring Ghidorah, in from his other dimension, using hate from whatever species is on the world, in this case humans on Earth, to like bring on that god. And in fact, it's interesting. It's basically saying that there is sort of this underlying philosophical message. Again, none of it ever really hits you over the head, but it's very much hinted at. And I don't think I'm reading into it. Like, there's quotes that you can pull where it seems fairly obvious, not hitting you over the head, but fairly obvious, where it's saying that really religion and gods come out of hate. In fact, heroes come out of hate, and so on. And so there's almost like an anti-religion, anti-hero kind of message in this. Of course, also there's that anti-technology message that's a major part of this film. I mean, this is really intellectual stuff. Intellectual stuff on a level that Godzilla as a franchise generally doesn't hit. Even though the first Godzilla film from the 50s was certainly a commentary on World War II, on, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay, and the A-bomb. And there may have been other, like Shin Godzilla, the kind of the latest live-action Godzilla film, certainly had a broader point to bring up. But this is, again, highly, highly philosophical and ideological. A lot of the points that they're bringing up were very interesting. And then, I mean, you pretty much find out the Exif, they come to this conclusion that, like we figured out how to travel through time. They're, and they start getting into almost like a Carlo Rovelli explanation of time, that there is no future, no tomorrow, but that eternity doesn't exist, and that the great blessing is destruction. And they're more or less talking about the great filter, saying that, eventually every civilization brings on its own monster, its own destruction, and that you should just accept that that's going to be a thing. Of course, for the Exif, it's Ghidorah that they actually bring in from an alternate universe. And that, again, as far as how much you want to agree with some of the messages in these films, that's up to personal taste. Some of it I thought was actually very insightful, personally. And again, it's not something that I think I'm interpreting what they're saying. I think it's what they're genuinely saying. And I'm sure if there were some kind of interviews with the creators on this, that they would probably explain more of that commentary. Maybe the most interesting thing is kind of the aftermath of what happens, because for various reasons, and again, it's hard to actually explain in audio, because so much of what goes on is very visual and there's not much talking. You have to see what's happening to really explain it. But basically, Godzilla does finally, beat Ghidorah, and Memphis ends up getting offed and so on. Now, in the second film, actually, I think it was the end of the first film, but in the second film, you find out more about the kind of the future descendants on Earth, perhaps humans that evolved in a certain way after however many tens of thousands of years that these movies take place after the 20th century. And they really did some interesting things with those. They just call them the natives. I don't think they ever gave them a name. They did some interesting things with those characters in this, and they really take a center stage. Like, you find out that the natives have developed telepathy. And also, there's a point where Mira and her sister, actually, you find out that Mira and her sister, they're really, these natives are just the anime equivalent of the twins from, the island where they bring on Mothra from, the twins that always sing Mothra, that whole business, which I thought was really cool. I didn't put that together that was them, obviously, because usually in the movies when they are calling for Mothra, they're maybe a foot tall, and as to where they're normal sized. In fact, Mira, one of the two sisters, there's a whole species of them, but these natives who are really the descendants of humans, but Mira ends up stooping Haruo, and falls in love with him and everything. And I just thought it was very sweet and very sexy at the same time. I love the fact that we got some sex in this, or at least heavily implied. You don't see the fucking, but that's fine. But it was heavily, heavily implied. And I enjoyed that. And even they have, so basically after Ghidorah is defeated by Godzilla, the humans, because of somebody left over, they get access to nanometal, and they find out that the nanometal can remember all of the technology it's ever touched, and so they could effectively rebuild civilization. So Haruo takes that source of nanometal, it's actually a person, takes the source of nanometal and rams it into Godzilla. Okay, and it is assumed that Haruo, the nanometal, and potentially Godzilla himself or herself is destroyed at that moment, when he rams that in, and it's all gone. And then it goes, 100 or however many years in the future after that. And, there's a bit of a time lapse that goes on, and you see as the humans integrate with the natives more and they become one species. And then, it's far in the future, and they're pretty much there's kind of a memorial that they're having to Haruo, who they see as a very real hero. And it would appear that the natives, and there are the hybrids of the natives and the humans, which again, the natives are really just future humans, have eschewed technology, and they're just going to continue to live a primitive life and, kind of be one with nature and all that. And that way they don't end up creating another monster, and they break the cycle that the Exif were claiming happens to every world, where monsters get created and destroy the world. Again, very anti-technology message, right? And saying getting back to nature and all that stuff. And I can, on a certain level, I can appreciate that. In fact, I really think, one of the beautiful things of when we do as a species, as humans, go to outer space and we're able to potentially, for lack of a better term, colonize other worlds, I hope that the people that are kind of into rewilding, ironically, of course, because they'd be using spacecraft to get there, but ironically, get to do their little bit of rewilding and live their natural lives. I mean, go ahead. I want people to be able to practice whatever kind of lifestyle they fucking want. If you want to go out there and, live in the cave or the woods, whatever, and, not worry about technology and all that. Frankly, if you've been listening to Sovryn Tech long enough, you fucking would. I mean, it almost seemed to be the logical conclusion. So, I can appreciate that, and I can really appreciate the message overall. In fact, really, Voltron Season 8 had somewhat of a similar message where there was this constant, message of, like Princess Allura would say it, even when they would bring on the creatures that like naturally have quintessence and everything, that was it, the Balmora, not to be confused with the Bella Saluto that we mentioned for Godzilla, but the Balmora in Voltron Legendary Defender, they're basically space whales, that happen to have like an entire species of bipeds that live inside of them. This idea that technology can't solve everything was very pervasive in Voltron Legendary Defender Season 8, and it's definitely a major message in this Godzilla animated trilogy. And I think that really comes out of, both for Voltron and for Godzilla, personally, I think that comes out of that, I've said this many times on Sovryn Tech, that we're not ready for the level of technology that we have, and I think a lot of people in some ways recognize that, and because they recognize that, they want to, they're so confused by it, they're dreaming of a golden age or a simpler time, perhaps. And this happens with any like major change this happened, you can find writings like this during the industrial age in the early 20th century. And I think in a very real way, these are the modern writings of that. I mean, one could almost argue that this, this is going to sound weird, but that this Godzilla trilogy, animated trilogy, is very much the modern Japanese version of, Henry David Thoreau's Walden, right? Like, get away from everything and just shut it all down, and ram it into the biggest monster you can. Take that technology and ram it into the biggest monster you can find. And I can really appreciate why people feel that way. Like, I can empathize and I can understand where they're coming from. Okay. And, effectively the humans go native at the end of this. And, in Japanese film, you get a lot of that. Like, even one of my favorites, Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within, that's one where there's this message of, we're hurting the earth. The Japanese very much have like an environmentalist bent. But their environmentalist bent doesn't come from the same like government and corporatist angles that reinforce it in America. Theirs comes really from Shinto. It comes from their culture, thousands of years old of their culture. And so that for that message to appear more in Japanese cinema, I think it's a little more genuine than perhaps it may be like other people feel it's perhaps not so genuine in American film and American TV shows and so on. And, there's debates to be had around that. Personally, I give a goddamn about the environment. Yes, I do. And, ecology is a very real science and I am on board. Okay. But yeah, I get, I can see where there are elements of either of both sides of this argument that have validity. And so, but for the Japanese, this is really a part of their culture. This kind of message is very deep for them. And it's really been in their cinema for a while, but also I think it's just getting more and more pervasive as technology becomes imminently more pervasive there. And that's how they react, is they make a Godzilla movie that becomes an anti-tech creed. And that's very much what I feel like this trilogy was, again, about the Great Filter, and at its core is about being in touch with nature to where you don't create the monster of your own destruction. I think that's really the message going out. And from an artistic perspective, again, I can really appreciate that. I can really respect what they're putting out there. I'm not saying I agree with it 100%. I'm just saying that I can really respect what they were trying to say with it. So anyway, it might be a weird thing for a tech journalist to say, but there you have it. So, all right, that'll wrap it up for this. Again, we probably won't do any kind of TV show review until maybe Castlevania Season 3. There's nothing else that's really on my radar. Anything Star Wars or Star Trek, I do specific shows for those that are about more than just TV shows. So, but that's where those would end up. There's nothing really... I got so many people telling me, oh, watch the Orville, oh, watch this. Some of the things, like there was a Dragon Prince and maybe that Sabrina show. Like I've checked them out and maybe I would review them on a Q&A, but there's nothing that I've watched where I'm just like, holy shit, I need to dedicate an entire episode of, I need to make an episode just to review this. I haven't really experienced that in film. I haven't experienced that on TV. I just haven't really experienced that in a long time. And Voltron Legendary Defender was a very special resurgence of some very real nostalgia that ended up, becoming much more than the sum of its parts. I've been a kaiju fan forever, so to review a animated Godzilla trilogy, dynamite. And really my only critique of the all right, I'll tell you this. Here's one problem I had with the Godzilla trilogy. I wanted Mechagodzilla. I wanted to see Mechagodzilla really in action, not Mechagodzilla City like in City on the Edge of Battle. I wanted to fucking see Mechagodzilla, and I was a little disappointed that I didn't. And like I said, also I wanted that kaiju battle in the end, but it was meant to be something very different. And it was just fortuitous that the conversation around the Godzilla trilogy matched up with releases of Voltron Legendary Defender, so it kind of came together. So don't expect these too often. I can't really picture the show that would come out that would just blow my mind, like Legendary Defender did, or the trilogy that would have the franchise cachet that that Godzilla does with me. So anyway, that's it for this. It's been fun reviewing Legendary Defender. I really do hope that something will come out in the future. I wouldn't mind if I don't think the Godzilla movies. There's just no. They ended it. I cannot picture that there is going to be a continuation of this in any way, nor would there be a TV series. Like it wouldn't even make sense. There is absolute finality to it. So that's over. So anyway, so is this episode. Plenty more content to come out for patrons throughout the month of January 2019. I will see all of you on the other side.